All right, this tutorial video is about scouting, the rating scales, and why I prefer the 20 to 80 scale. You can see here we're at the game settings screen where you can look at current and potential ratings as well as the overall and potential ratings. And you have a bunch of different options. You can go 1 to 5, 1 to 100, 20 to 80. The first reason why I use 20 to 80 is because it's what real baseball scouts and front offices use. And since it's coming on a scouting report to me in a baseball game where I'm a fictional general manager of a front office, I like to use the 20 to 80 because it's realistic and it's what's used in real life. So I use that. But I also think it makes sense mathematically, and you don't have to be a big math nerd to understand why 20 to 80 makes the most sense and why 1 to 100 is just like not really realistic. And I am definitely not a big math expert, so if any math experts listen and tell me I've got some of my explanation wrong, yeah, please feel free to do that. So in a 20 to 80 scale that I've got here, 50 is average, right? So a guy who has an overall rating of a 50, your scout thinks is a league average player. And every 10 points away from 50, so 40 on the low end, 60 on the high end, is a standard deviation away. You don't need to get into what a standard deviation is. Just know that 3 standard deviations from the average in any data set is going to comprise over 99%, I believe it's 99.3 or 99.7% of the data in a set will be comprised when you include 3 standard deviations. So what that tells us is 3 standard deviations from 50 to the low end is 20, right? 40 is 1, 30 is 2, 20 is 3. And on the high end, it's 80 because you go 60, 70, and 80 is the third. So in that 20 to 80 scale, you're going to capture 99.7% of the data set, in this instance being Major League Baseball players. So really what you're doing when you use like 1 to 100 or 1 to 20, it's getting detailed to the point that it's not really something we can realistically differentiate between a player who's like a 92 and a 93 and a 94. It's so fine. And the 20 to 80 scale mathematically is set to capture over 99% of the players involved. So that's why just mathematically it makes sense to me, and also the realism makes sense to me. So that's why I choose to go with it. Hey, play the game however you want, right? Like play the game that most makes it enjoyable to you. It's just a game. But in terms of realism and I guess I don't know what the right word is, just kind of what makes sense mathematically, 20 to 80 scale is by far the best option to use in those if you want to go for those kind of things. Now you can go increments of 5, which I do use. You will sometimes, if you read books about scouting or you read about scouting, some teams, are basically like, don't give me a 45, like give me a 40 or a 50. What is the player? Is he a 40 or 50? 45 is like nonsense. Get out of here. Now, because the majority of any data set, the majority of the players are going to fall close to the average, close to the mean, which is 50. You'll see some teams use 45 and 55 as differentiators between 40 and 50 players. But then once you get over 60 or below 40, you'll just see increments of 5. So I do wish that was an option here in Out of the Park. I wish you could go 20, 30, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60, and then 70, 80. Because that's really the most detailed you'll see a scouting scale get from Major League scouts for the most part. I'm sure there are exceptions to that. But so that's why I use 20 to 80. Now, 20 to 80 might not be as intuitive for people as like a 1 to 100. 1 to 100 is much probably easier because there's more differentiation between people, but also like, I don't know if you played video games, like if you came to this game from MLB The Show or you played EA Sports games growing up, like the scale was 1 to 100. So you're used to like an 80 player being like, he's fine, but a 95 is amazing. So it might throw you off a little bit to use 20 to 80. So Fangraphs is a really great resource, which you should use if you need it and contribute if you can. And so here is kind of how they break down the 20 to 80 scale and what it means for future value. So in this, you can apply it to the overall or the potential. But let's say we're looking at a prospect of yours who we're looking at his potential rating, right? If he's a 20, what this means is that he's an organizational guy. He doesn't have any future, right? 30 means he might be an up and down guy. He might be a guy who reaches the majors for a brief amount of time. And again, this is going to differ a little bit in Out of the Park, because Out of the Park has more higher end players than you'll find in Major League Baseball. So 30 guys for me are not really up and down, and 40 is not. I might use some guys has bench players as a 40. So, but it's still pretty similar. So if you have and these are for hitters, I should say. So if you have a hitter who's a 40 future value, your scout's projecting him to be a bench player. When you start to get into 50, that's an average everyday player, right? We said 50 is average, so it's an average everyday player. If you have a guy who's a future value 50, you can count on him being an average major league player, which is pretty good, right? If you have all average players on your team, you'll be a pretty good team because you don't have any weak spots on your roster. And then as you go up, there are definitely too many 80 scale prospects in Out of the Park baseball. Really, that's a top 5 overall player in baseball. I think there's like one guy right now on Fangraphs actual real life prospect board that's above a 65. And you can also convert it to WAR, like how many WAR over a season that player would be, approximated to get. So that's kind of how it works for hitters. And then for pitchers, it's a little different. 50 is again average, which average being a number 4 starter here, a guy 1.8 to 2.5 WAR. And then once you get up over 60 to 70, you're talking about top of the end rotation arms. And it's rare to see 80s. Most staffs aren't going to have an 80. Basically a 70, this says number 2 starters, FIP under 3, about 200 innings pitched. But a 5 to 7 WAR pitcher is the number 1 pitcher. I think this is a little off, I would say, with how, obviously the guy who wrote this, Eric, knows, that's an interesting ad, knows a lot more about prospects than me, does it for a living. But the way that I think about it is a 70 is generally a number 1 starter, and a 60 is a number 2 to 3 starter. And so, so that's kind of how the scale works with 20 to 80. That's why I use it. And, as always, like I said, just use whatever scale makes the most sense to you. But I think in terms of realism and mathematic realism as well, 20 to 80 is the way to go, and certainly it's the way that front offices go. So if you have any questions about this, or if I confused anything with the math, let me know. But that's all for this one. So go switch your scouting scales to 20 to 80, so when you post on the Reddit, I don't see your 1 to 100 scale and roll my eyes a little bit. No, just kidding. Do what you want. Bye.